Hello, everyone, and welcome to Against the Storm, a primer. In this video, I'm going to be talking about this delightful settlement building roguelite game, Against the Storm, and providing a sort of overview slash introduction to the game's core systems, such that you are able to understand this game when watching it, or if you are playing it yourself, you have the basic mechanics down well enough to win your first couple of settlements. Before I dive into exactly how it works, I'd first like to talk about what exactly is Against the Storm. Against the Storm is a roguelite settlement builder. Kind of an interesting fusion of two different game types. The settlement building aspect is most similar to a game called Banished from about 10 years ago. But it's also similar to games like the old Pharaoh and Rome games that were settlement builders on the PC. A little bit similar to something like Cities Skylines in terms of how you're managing the overall balance of your settlement, but definitely done in a much smaller scale. And Against the Storm, some of the key things that drive your success are attention to detail. This is definitely a game with a lot of little tidbits to keep track of that can really impact your settlement. Things like resource chains, efficient movement paths for your villagers, making sure to keep track of all the different resources that you've got coming in and going out. Being able to place buildings efficiently and have an eye for overall efficiency at a large scale. Being able to correctly balance resource inputs and outputs. Very much a game of sort of macroeconomics and overall management. And if these are the sort of things that you enjoy doing, then Against the Storm is definitely a very cozy experience. However, the roguelike mechanics of Against the Storm really mix it up. And when I say roguelike in this sense, I mean randomly generated, and I mean sort of short-form gameplay. In Against the Storm, you're playing individual settlements, game sessions that last usually between 2 to 3 hours. And in each of those settlements, you are tackling random objectives with random resources. And that, like many roguelite games, means that there's an emphasis on conditional decision-making. Choosing the best option out of 3 random ones that are presented. And that can definitely mean working with what you're given. You don't necessarily get to choose the best choice in any given situation. You don't get to pick the best building or best cornerstone. Instead, you have to figure out what the best of your 3 options is, even if your best option is not very good, and figure out how to use that to improve your position and still make progress in the game. You can't do something like follow an optimized build order or create the exact same settlement every time because of these randomized roguelite aspects of Against the Storm. And that definitely adds some challenge to the gameplay. It means you've got to do on-the-fly decision-making, which I personally quite enjoy. With all that said, let's actually jump into the in-game screen of Against the Storm. I'm going to do an overview of the world map, the upgrade tree, and how sort of the macro level of the game works. And then we're going to jump into a settlement and look at the first 3 years of gameplay, so you can see what the beginning of a successful settlement in Against the Storm looks like. Here we go. So we're loading into a fairly new save file. This is a save file started fresh with just 1 victorious settlement placed so far. Every time you jump back into Against the Storm, this is the screen you'll be greeted with. The smoldering city, the capital, here at the center of sort of the Blightstorm, I guess you could call it. And then settlements in a chain will be extending out from the smoldering city. Each time you go to play against the storm, you're choosing a new location on the world map here, sort of to place a settlement, with your goal being to eventually work towards and then break a seal. These are sort of like the boss fights of Against the Storm. And you want to connect a series of settlements that makes your way towards the bronze seal while also collecting enough seal fragments to be able to break them. The first seal, the bronze seal, is very easy to break. You don't need a whole lot of seal fragments, and it's not too difficult, but there are a escalating series of seals to break that will further push you and challenge you. At the capital, you can purchase upgrades. We often call these meta progression in the context of a roguelite game. That is to say that you get unlocks that provide bonuses to the stats or the output of your settlement, which ultimately makes the game quite a bit easier. As you win more and more settlements, you'll accumulate food stockpiles as well as the other secondary resources, and you can gain an increasing amount of passive bonuses, as well as usually major mechanics or other significant things are unlocked through the tree. They start with important things like trade routes, which I'll mention briefly during this primer when we get to the section on trading, as well as things like additional embarkation points, additional levels of upgrade for the main hearth, and many, many other things. The longer you play Against the Storm, the more of these you will unlock, and therefore the easier overall, but also the more complex overall the game will get to become. And this is counteracted by the difficulty system of Against the Storm. So in Against the Storm, there are 4 base difficulties and 20 additional prestige levels, which are very similar to ascension levels from Slay the Spire, in that they are a whole bunch of different sort of stacking modifiers. 4 base difficulties are Settler, Pioneer, Veteran, and Viceroy, each of which have a different number of orders that you get to do during the game. Those are like your quests that will provide you points, as well as at modifying a few different in-game stats to be harder. And then as you ascend through the prestige levels, each prestige level applies a unique stacking penalty to your game, culminating in 20 different difficulty modifiers that all add up to quite a lot. Some of these difficulty modifiers include things like all your buildings costing 50% more, all your trade goods being worth 50% less, all your villagers eating more food, stuff like that. With all 20 enabled, the game gets pretty dang difficult, especially if you are playing with certain modifiers that make things more challenging. When you go to place a new settlement, you'll be choosing one of initially 2. You can get a 3rd option unlocked at the Smoldering Citadel, but you'll be choosing one of 2 starting caravans, and then augmenting that with some embarkation bonuses, basically just some additional resources to start with. When choosing your starting caravan, you want to consider the biome that you're deploying onto. There are quite a few different biomes to play in Against the Storm. And we can see several of them right here. When you select a tile on the map, that tells you the biome right at the top left there. So green is Royal Woodlands. Royal Woodlands has an abundance of wood. By clicking on the Conditions tab, you can see a breakdown of what's there. Every biome has a different set of natural resources. These are different types of goods that will be found in that biome. So, for example, the Royal Woodlands has lots of clay, meat, berries, eggs, vegetables, roots, and mushrooms, but you don't find stone, you don't find insects, you don't find herbs on this map type. Whereas a biome like the marshlands, you can see that there's grain, mushrooms, meat, eggs, copper, and stone, but no clay, no berries, no vegetables. And Coral Forest. Coral Forest is a particularly cool one. Coral forests have different trees that have different secondary resources in them. And here there's vegetables and herbs, but no mushrooms are found. The local fiber type is reed, stone instead of clay. So with each biome having different resource types, you may want to consider exactly which tile you're deploying on when you place a new settlement. Each biome also has a different visual theme to it, and that can make picking a biome sort of an interesting little experience. So going back into difficulty for a second, as you unlock new perks in the Smoldering Citadel at your capital, the game gets easier and easier. Each time you win a new settlement, you'll gain more resources for use at the Smoldering City. And the higher difficulty you play on, the more resources that you'll get. That said, because the game gets harder each time, I think it's best to ascend difficulties as you feel comfortable. The game will ultimately force you to ascend through the prestige difficulties. The further away you get from the capital, the higher the minimum difficulty becomes. You're allowed to play on the base difficulty Settler right up until this first sort of hexagonal ring from the Citadel. But each time you pass one of these gray lines here, the minimum difficulty that you must play on increases. So as you get further and further away from the capital in later Blightrot cycles, or Blightstorm cycles, you'll have to go higher and higher up the difficulties. Yeah, so and those later seals will require, again, there's 8 different seals to break, ending in the Adamantine seal, which requires you to play on the highest difficulty, Prestige 20. But if you're just watching this video for the first time, then probably you're a long, long way away from that. So why don't we jump into our first little settlement here, and I'll show off the actual core gameplay of Against the Storm. Let's see, I don't want to play with a modifier. Let's do a Marshlands game here. I'll show off the Marshlands biome for this game. So the Marshlands have an abundance of meat and eggs. That makes lizards a pretty good species type to bring to the Marshlands. There are 5 different species in Against the Storm. Humans, beavers, lizards. There's also harpies and foxes, which I think may have to be unlocked through the Smoldering City. And you'll get some mixture of these with each caravan. Usually you only know 1 or maybe 2 of the species that will be in your settlement, but ultimately every settlement has 3 different species of villagers. I'm going to choose this middle caravan here. We'll start with 4 lizards, 4 humans, and some resources here. We get bonus eggs, vegetables, amber, and a couple random villagers. That means we have 10 villagers to start, which is pretty good. I usually recommend having at least 8 villagers in your starting caravan. Exactly what you get offered from these is pretty much totally random. So you may not necessarily get everything that you need to start. And that's where your embarkation bonuses come in. You can use these to supplement the weaknesses of whatever caravan you're starting with. For this run, I'm just going to grab some initial wood, a little bit of stone, and some food. And these will be our embarkation bonuses. And I'll show this off on the Viceroy difficulty, not going through the prestiges yet, as this is just the second settlement of the save file. So without further ado, we'll jump right into our settlement here, and I'll talk about some more of the core mechanics in the game. At the start of each game, you get a sort of little summary here. You're shown all your forest mysteries. We'll talk about those a little bit more during the storm, but basically you get 1 positive random bonus, and then depending on what difficulty you're on, up to 4 random negative malices that will activate with the hostility mechanic, as well as sort of a summary of any difficulty modifiers you have. Looks like our positive modifier this game is a bonus to planting speed during drizzle. So here's what a starting glade in Against the Storm looks like. You start with all of your villagers. Looks like we actually have all 3 species to start here, which is a little bit unusual. You start with a main warehouse, which is the central storage of your settlement. The ancient hearth, which is where everybody goes to take a break. You start with a bunch of space and maybe a few resource nodes. We got eggs, we got stone here, and we got some fertile ground, which can be used to plant things. I like to start out my settlement by placing down a couple of woodcutters camps so that you can cut trees. There's usually sort of a lot to take in here at the very beginning, so it can be a little bit hard to get your initial footing. But I have a pretty solid year 1 plan that I've come around these days, which definitely starts with double woodcutters camp. So let's plop those right here. You also want housing for your initial people. We have 10 people, and a shelter holds 3 individuals, so we'll need 4 shelters. The placement of houses is usually not that important. When it comes to building placement, I'm usually looking to leave space near the main warehouse for production buildings. That's the most important thing when it comes to optimizing your building placement. Houses are never visited by your villagers, so you want them within the radius of the hearth, which is shown by this sort of orange radius here, but then as far away from the warehouse as possible within that radius, basically. So kind of tucked away in the corner here, we'll queue up 4 houses for our villagers to live in. I also like to lay down some initial paths here, sort of in a grid usually. I lay a grid around the ancient hearth and between the main warehouse here. And this lets me have efficient paths through the town for the villagers, as well as sort of keeping me organized here. In fact, let's move this house here so that we can continue that path. So that'll queue up some of our building stuff here. At the very beginning, we also get to choose 3 blueprints. You'll get more blueprints as we unlock more through reputation. A little bit more on that in a moment. So, choosing buildings is definitely a tough thing to do in Against the Storm. In roguelite style, you're getting a pick of 3 here, but it's a random selection of 3. So when you choose a blueprint, you're getting offered 3 completely random buildings. They may or may not be immediately helpful. Each building lists the blueprints, or rather the recipes that it has, with most buildings having around 3 recipes. And then those are given a number of stars in parentheses, which indicates sort of the overall quality level of them. The higher the quality level of a recipe, the faster that it is produced, and the more efficiently it is made. And that means that, by efficiently, I mean less starting materials are required to generate a fixed amount of output materials. None of these strike me as immediately useful here. So, Brickyard makes bricks, Leatherworker makes water skins and fabric, Carpenter makes planks and tools. Bricks, fabric, and planks are what we call building materials. These are used for advanced types of buildings, as well as an ingredient for a few other things. Pottery and water skins are containers, which are used for making pickled goods as well as wine and ale. Tools have a specific use for opening glades. Here at the early game, building materials are quite useful. Having the ability to make planks reasonably efficiently is quite nice. But I could see a use for bricks or water skins as well. That said, I think planks are probably one of the most overall useful building materials. So I'm going to grab Carpenter here for the 2-star planks. Then we get another choice of 3. Herbalist Camp, Herb Garden, or Forager's Camp. These are advanced camps that can allow you to gather resources from large type nodes, whereas the Herb Garden lets you make food from farm fields. We actually have a farm field in the opening node, so I'm going to grab the Herb Garden to show off farming a little bit. And then Provisioner, Bakery, Rain Mill. Provisioner can make flour, barrels, and pack provisions. Bakery can make biscuits and pie. These are complex foods that are going to require flour. Or the Rain Mill makes flour, and I think having an initial source of flour is pretty good. So I'm going to grab a Rain Mill here for 3-star flour production. Then we can later grab a biscuit or pie recipe to make complex food. More on complex food in a moment, which I've said a few times now. Picking those initial blueprints can be a little bit daunting. Most of the things we grab, we can't make. These require building materials that we don't have. And I think we'd like to get that Carpenter online first. We don't even have enough planks to make an herb garden, so we'll have to make a priority for plank gathering as well. Let's see here. So, quick little overview on building placement. Let's also grab a camp here to go to the snake nests, and I'm going to unpause as well here and get everybody starting to construct things. So when it comes to building placement, most of your workers are going to be working at camp-type buildings. The woodcutter's camp, stonecutter's camp, harvester's camp, forager's camp, herbalist camp, and trapper's camp. All of these are very similar in function, but are all relating to different types of nodes. But how it works is that your camp here has a number of slots to which villagers can be assigned, and villagers follow the following path. Starting from the hearth, they move to the camp building. Then they'll go from the camp to the resource node and directly gather from the resource. So the woodcutters will chop the wood at the trees. They'll gather that resources into their hands, bring it to the woodcutter's camp, which has itself a limited amount of storage here. When that storage fills up, they move from the camp to the main warehouse, emptying the storage of the camp. Then they'll move back to the camp, gather more resources, repeat that process until it's break time, which happens approximately every 2 minutes for most species. When a villager goes to take a break, they'll run to the hearth. That's when they'll take a short break. They'll idle there for a little while, as well as consuming food at this time. I believe each villager, by default, requires 1 unit of food each time they take a break. So again, they go from camp to resource, to camp to warehouse, to camp to resource, to camp, and then to the hearth, and then back to their camp. And the way to make this process most efficient is to minimize the time it takes for each of those steps. So minimize the time for each step by placing, for the shortest distance, you want the shortest distance between the camp and the resource node. In particular, for your woodcutters' camps, this means keeping them close to the tree line. And you want to also minimize the distance between the camp and the warehouse, as well as the camp and the hearth. That way, your villagers will be gathering resources as often as possible. You also want to make sure that the arrow, the directionality placement for the camp, is facing towards the resource node. You don't want your don't want your woodcutter's camp to be facing this way, for example, because each time the worker goes to drop off resources, they'll move to the front. So make sure that the arrow is pointing towards the resources, basically. And lastly, workers never visit house or service buildings. That's why we put our shelters in the corner. And when it comes to making service buildings later, we'll do something pretty similar. Okay, let's grab a trapper's camp here so that we can gather some eggs from this. When it comes to the first year of a game in Against the Storm, I usually have a couple basic goals in mind. And those goals are as follows. 1, get up a couple of woodcutters camps, as well as enough camps in the starting glade so that everybody can have a job. Workers are builders, which means they'll construct buildings or paths that need to be constructed, as long as they don't have any other job. So you can see here at the top left, we have a total population, and then builders, as well as the number of homeless people are listed. We've actually got a house for everybody currently, but this is a nice little quick overview of who's who. Quick hotkey overview here for Against the Storm. Some very useful hotkeys for this game. First up, Alt. Alt brings up the worker placement overlay. When you have Alt selected, you'll get this panel for every building that can take workers. And you can easily place workers into the slots here. To change which species you have selected, you can just scroll up or down with the mouse wheel. So you can easily change which species is selected and then, change who's actually in these worker slots. B. When B is pressed down, you will bring up the icons for all resources that you can currently see. And Control, I believe, brings up the recipe control panel, but we won't actually have that until we make a building with more than one recipe. With your woodcutters camps, you'll note there's actually quite a few options here. These are behavior options for cutting trees. I recommend setting your woodcutters camps to avoid glades except marked. That means that workers assigned to the woodcutters camp will automatically cut any trees in range, except ones that would open up a new glade. We start here in a single sort of clearing of the forest, a so-called glade, but we're surrounded by many others, these sort of shadowed areas between the trees. When you cut into these by eliminating all the trees between you and them, then you explore the glade, revealing its contents. Each glade contains resource nodes. However, there are penalties to glades as well. Every glade that you open will increase a mechanic called hostility, which I'll talk more about in a little bit. And glades that are dangerous glades, marked with a skull, or forbidden glades, marked with a big red skull, like this one, have events in them. And these events have to be dealt with in a certain time frame, or a penalty will ensue. That said, exploring glades is one of the main things you're going to be using to advance yourself in a game of Against the Storm. Let's see here. We'll talk about those in a moment. So, let's talk cornerstones next. You get your first cornerstone about 1 minute into the game. And just like with blueprints from buildings, you get a choice of 3 here. Choosing a cornerstone can be a little tricky. You're offered essentially 3 random bonuses, and you have to figure out if these bonuses are useful to you or not. Here we've got Dye Extractor, which gives us pigment for producing insects. Currently, we're not making insects. If you want a reminder of what's on the map, you can look at the conditions here by mousing over this little icon next to the Queen's Envoy here. So this reminds us that our natural resources, for example, do not include insects. That tells you that Dye Extractor is not very good here. Zorg's secret ingredient gives us skewers for making pickled goods. We don't have a way to make pickled goods, but this could become good later. Or meat specialization. Meat production increases every 25 times it's produced. Meat is a natural resource on this map type, so maybe that works out okay. Let's try that. We'll take meat specialization. If none of your options are good, you can decline and get 10 amber. Amber is sort of the money resource in this game. Very useful at the trader. And if your options aren't immediately useful or you don't foresee any way to get any use out of them, then declining is a good idea. But we're going to try meat specialization here so that we can potentially get more meat if we find a decent source of it. Okay, I'm also going to place an early crude workstation here. This is our easiest way to make building materials, is the crude workstation. At the crude workstation, you can make planks out of wood, fabric out of plant fiber, leather, or reed, bricks out of stone or clay, and pipes out of metal if you have them. We want to use planks in order to get some of our other building types online. Notably, in order to make the herb garden that can create food, we're going to need a couple of planks. So to do that, we'll enable planks in the crude workstation, as well as assign at least one worker to there. And then they'll start automatically gathering wood. They'll get, so kind of like a camp. The worker goes to the main warehouse, gathers the ingredient, brings that to the workstation. Then once they've gathered enough of the ingredient, they will manufacture the advanced good from the basic good. So let's talk a little bit actually about material chains here, as this is our first sort of example of this. In Against the Storm, there are a whole lot of different production chains, you can call them. Many of which we can view here at the recipes panel. So let's see here. So materials kind of are done as follows here. You start with the raw material. And that can be then converted into building materials at a place like the crude workstation, which can then be used to make buildings. You can also take raw food and from that make complex food, which is one of the advanced needs for your villagers. Raw food, some complex food requires an additional step. So raw food can be converted into flour, or you can make containers and combine those with raw food to make complex food that is pickled goods or baked goods. For example, one of the buildings that we have already is the rain mill, which can turn grain, roots, or mushrooms into flour. Flour itself cannot be eaten, but it is another ingredient for complex food. And lastly, service goods needed for the higher level service needs of your villagers are even a little bit more complicated. Raw materials have to be turned into intermediate goods, and there may be one or more steps required, which eventually become service goods. And something important to note here is that production multipliers apply at each step of this process. So if you have, for example, a chance for double yields, then each time you convert a resource, those bonuses apply. So let's look at some of the chains in the recipe panel that can sort of highlight that. By clicking Show All, you can see all of the recipes in the game, even ones that your settlement doesn't have necessarily. So an example of, let's see, currently have products shown. So let's just see the ingredients here. So raw materials are things that you directly gather from the world. This includes wood, copper ore, raw food, stone, clay, grain, plant fiber, leather, reed, resin, etc. All of these can be transformed into other more advanced materials. For example, wood becomes planks, stone and clay become bricks, plant fiber and leather become fabric. Let's see. And then those can become more advanced things. So for example, containers barrels are made from planks and copper bars. So to make barrels, you need to have wood that you turn into planks, you need to have copper ore that you turn into copper bars, and then you have to combine both of those at the cooperage, or whatever building has your barrels recipe in order to make barrels. And then those barrels, oops, can't type today. And then those barrels are themselves an ingredient in making advanced materials. They can be combined with raw food to make pickled goods. They can be directly packaged into pack-and-trade goods, or you can create them into wine or ale by combining with grain for ale or berries, reeds, or mushrooms to make wine. Another example of a really complicated material chain is training gear. To make training gear, you have to combine planks or reeds with stone or metal. And if you're making it with metal and planks, you have to have wood that you manufacture into planks. You have to have the metal ore that you then manufacture into the metal bars, and then you have to combine them. And again, each of these steps requires a different recipe at a different building. And this is what makes maintaining production chains in Against the Storm so difficult. At the beginning of your run in year one, you're not going to be able to have anything other than the most basic production chain. You can turn raw resources into building materials, and that's about it. You're going to want to, as you pick new blueprints, keep the other steps of these production chains in mind, so that you can combine it into something functional. So we're getting the first step of that production chain online by being able to create planks here. This will require, again, wood, which will require constant work from the woodcutters' camps, which we do want to keep positioning here. Brief overview of the year. Each year in Against the Storm is broken down into 3 seasons. Drizzle season is first, during which crops are planted, and you have your positive bonus in play. Then there's clearance season, the second season, during which crops are harvested, and not a whole lot else happens. The third and final season is called the storm season, when the sky opens up. And this causes everyone's resolve to drop pretty substantially. Let's talk a little bit about the success and failure goal here of Roll of Against the Storm, or a game of Against the Storm. To win in Against the Storm, you need reputation. This is the blue meter in the bottom left here. And reputation is earned through a number of methods. You need reputation to win. Reputation is absolutely required. Every game you have to get 14 or 18, depending on the difficulty level that you're playing on. You get 1 point per completed order. Let's talk about orders here real quick. Orders are given to you every year, starting with 3 on year 1, and they're basically quests. Like with other things in Against the Storm, you're presented with 2 or 3 random choices, and you have to figure out which one is best contextually for your situation here. Your first orders usually have pretty easy requirements, but the further you get into a playthrough of Against the Storm, the more complex the requirements get for later orders, and the more rewarding they are too. For your early orders, I recommend picking at least a couple that you can complete fairly early. You want to both consider how easy they are to complete, as well as consider how good the rewards are. So for this first order here, complete 2 glade events. That just means opening 2 glades and doing whatever's in them. Dangerous glades always have a glade event. Normal glades might not. Delivering 15 copper ore. That's not too hard to get our hands on either. But currently we don't see any copper mines, which means we don't have a guaranteed way to get this. Whereas we do have a guaranteed way to get Problem Solver. So I would lean towards Problem Solver. Both have pretty similar rewards here. 6 tools. Tools very valuable. Getting a bunch of building materials from an early reward can be quite nice. And same with additional villagers. More people is definitely more helpful up to a point. Option 2, Deliver 1 ancient tablet. Ancient tablets are definitely tricky to get. You could certainly get one of these early, but it's no guarantee. So I'd call this one a little tricky. Whereas 3 packs is kind of pricey. We'd have to manufacture different packs of goods, but the bonus we get is pretty substantial. We actually get a perk here. Additional fabric every yield, as well as some parts, which are pretty hard to come by. I tend to shy away from orders that have very high material costs, like 3 packs. So I think I would choose the relic here, but this one could take a long time to complete because we don't know how long it will be until we can actually find an ancient tablet. And we'll choose the 3rd order here. Get a trading post and deliver 10 ambers, a nice easy one. We in fact already have 5 amber. Or complete 2 glade events and deliver 5 pack of building materials to get jerky, parts, and villagers. Trading post seems both easier to complete to me. 10 amber is definitely easier to get than 5 pack of building materials. And it's more rewarding, right? More parts, more tools, a little bit less food overall, and less villagers, but maybe we don't want this many villagers. I would take trading post. Regardless of what you choose, you're going to want to pick 1 or 2 of those orders to try to complete relatively early. Let's make sure we build our trading post here. You want to make sure that your trading post goes down before the end of year 1, generally speaking. So each of these orders that we complete will give us 1 point of reputation. 1 point of blue here. And every time we pass a little blue diamond on the rep meter, we get a new blueprint. So we can choose a new building, which will give us more flexibility and power within the settlement. More ability to fulfill the needs of our villagers. You can also get reputation from glade events. Every glade we open will contain, well, every dangerous or higher glade, rather, we open will contain an event, some of which give reputation as a reward for completing them, although not all of them. You can also get rep from caches. We'll take a look at the first cache we see when we find that. As well as reputation from keeping the resolve of your villagers high. I haven't talked too much about resolve, so I'll talk about that really briefly right now. Every species has a green number underneath their face. That's their resolve, their happiness level. And every villager has a whole bunch of different special needs that can improve the resolve of the villager. The most basic need for everybody is housing. Everyone wants a house. If they don't have a house, then they don't get the basic housing bonus. There's also species-specific houses, special houses for humans, beavers, and lizards. At the very beginning of an Against the Storm play session, you won't have the blueprints for these advanced species houses unlocked, but you can see them as your blueprint perks. That thunderclap means it's almost time for the storm. In addition to the basic needs, every villager has some complex food needs, different foods that they want. Humans, for example, want porridge, biscuits, and pie, whereas beavers want biscuits and pickled goods. The different advanced foods that you can make will depend on the blueprints that you're able to find during your playthrough. You'll want to look for food blueprints that have an overlap between multiple species of villagers when possible. Every species has a different reputation threshold. For example, lizards need to get to 15 to be in the blue. That's the little blue tick on their reputation meter here. Humans and beavers need to get to 30. Once a species reaches their reputation threshold, they'll start automatically gaining reputation over time, which can help you win. Meanwhile, the way that you lose in Against the Storm is the other meter, the red meter here, called the impatience meter. The impatience meter causes you to lose. However, each point of impatience will reduce the overall hostility, which we'll talk about 1 second here as soon as the storm starts. Hostility gradually increases over time, or rather impatience gradually increases over time. So you have a sort of a constant timer ticking towards your inevitable loss. It's also gained if you lose any villagers, if you fail to solve threats, that is, if you fail to solve a dangerous glade event, as well as being gained when you summon the trader early. You can call traders immediately to make them show up, but you will receive immediate impatience. And there's a few other ways to gain impatience as well. However, you can reduce impatience. Every time you gain reputation, you'll lose 1 point of impatience. Although on higher difficulties, this drops down to only half a point of impatience lost. Additionally, you can reduce the gain over time by having a human work in the Ancient Hearth. Didn't talk about this too much yet, but one of the many jobs in your settlement is the Ancient Hearthkeeper. Each different species in your settlement provides a different bonus when assigned to the Ancient Hearth. For example, lizards will provide +1 resolve to everybody. Humans will cause the impatience over time to grow slower. So instead of 0.24 per minute, it's 0.18 per minute. And a beaver Ancient Hearthkeeper will reduce your fuel consumption in hearths by 20%, meaning you can burn fuel more efficiently. When you start getting additional hearths, that's when that becomes really important. For now, I like having the Lizard Hearthkeeper to keep everybody just a little bit happier. All right, so the storm begins here. Let's talk about hostility here, as well as a few other things. Storm is always the most challenging part of the year. During the storm, every species gets a big penalty to their global resolve that's based on your hostility level. And this can cause you to have problems with resolve here. Big time. So let's talk about managing resolve during the storm here. Keeping every villager above 0 is essential. If a species resolve drops to or below 0, then you will take a loss of villagers. First, the resolve drops to 0, and then sort of a red wheel starts, kind of, or a red timer decreases around the villager. And if that reaches 0, then you lose 1 member of that species permanently. So you lose population permanently, and you'll gain some impatience from an individual leaving. One of the easiest ways to get bonuses is to make sure your hearth is leveled up. Actually, a good, important to-do before the first storm is to make sure that you have at least 8 of your villagers housed, and you make 4 comfort decorations, which I did forget to do in all the talk here. I like to put some pipes down usually to let people know this is a great place to live. Decor just has to go within the radius of the Ancient Hearth, and you just need 4 of them for that first level 1 upgrade. Each separate hearth you make can have this upgrade. You just need 8 people who have a house within range of the hearth, and you need 4 comfort decorations. That gives you +2 to everybody's resolve, which is a very good start. That's one of the most basic ways to manage resolve. You can also control hostility. The penalty to resolve you take during the storm is dependent on the level of hostility, and there are a number of factors that control this. One of the easiest ways to reduce hostility quickly is to have less woodcutters. Each current woodcutter is 24 points of hostility. So if you unassign enough people to decrease your hostility here, we just went from 1 to 0, then that'll cause a large bonus to global resolve, and those people can work on building those decorations. You can also assign villagers to buildings that give them a comfort bonus. Every species has a different type of building that they get a resolve bonus at. For example, lizards get +5 resolve when working at a hearth. So this one lizard is getting a small bonus and raising the average resolve of lizards. That's actually the number that you're seeing is the average resolve of all of your villagers. Now we just got +2 from that hearth upgrading. And like I said, you can also unassign woodcutters to temporarily reduce hostility and help control resolve. If these methods aren't enough, you have another couple things you can do. You can favor one of your species. When you favor a species, that one species gets +5 to their resolve, but the others get -5. So this can be useful for balancing resolve when only one of your species is kind of out of whack or deeply in need. And as a sort of last resort, and only as a last resort, you can sacrifice fuel at your hearth here. You can sacrifice wood at a rate of 40 per minute to reduce hostility by 50, or you can sacrifice coal at a rate of 20 per minute to reduce hostility by 80, and that stacks up to 3 times. I only recommend doing this if you are in a situation where you're imminently going to be losing villagers, because otherwise, I just don't think that it's worth it. This costs too many resources too quickly. Otherwise, it's and you can really easily burn through all your fuel trying to save people during a storm and just come out weaker on the other side of the storm for it. If you have no fuel, your settlement can really spiral out of control in a bad way. So only as a last resort do I recommend sacrificing. I strongly recommend other methods of hostility control first. Let's do a brief hostility overview as well here. Hostility is the main thing that makes the game difficult during the storm. You always have a way to see the hostility here in the middle of the interface. It's the number shown next to this red eye. And there are quite a few different factors that control your hostility. Each year that advances, you'll gain 45 hostility. Every glade that you open also increases hostility. So for that reason, you don't want to open too many glades. In fact, we haven't even opened one glade yet, but we're going to do that right now. Open our first glade. I like to make my first glade be a dangerous glade, usually towards the middle/end of the first storm. This will coincide dealing with the dangerous glade event with your first trader arriving. Small glades contain a lot less resources than dangerous glades. Small glades are 15 hostility each, whereas forbidden glades or dangerous glades are 30 hostility each. But each dangerous glade contains far more than twice the resources of a small glade, so it's far more economical to open dangerous glades than it is to open small glades. Opening a large amount of small glades will spike the hostility of your settlement and cause you to have very low resolve during storms. So you don't want to open too many small glades. You also get additional hostility for each villager. So the more people you have, the higher the hostility. The number of current woodcutters, this is something that you can control on the fly. And then you get negatives applied for every hearth you have, minus 30 per hearth, and minus 15 per point of impatience. So the longer the game's been going on, the lower your hostility. Controlling your hostility is key to ensuring that your storms are survivable and manageable. To control the hostility, you want to keep making new hearths as you discover new space. You want to open glades only when you need to, hunting for new resources. And you want to avoid opening small glades unnecessarily. Some quick tips for hostility control. So here's our first dangerous glade. We can see that there are quite a few things in here. One, we've got copper ore. We've got a large leech broodmother. This requires an advanced trapper's camp, which we don't have, in order to be able to harvest from, but does give meat, which is really good with our cornerstone that we picked up, the meat specialization. We get +1 to meat production every 25 times it's been made. So there should be a lot of meat contained within this broodmother that we can get access to if we can get a large trapper's camp. There's also a couple of large stone deposits. These are valuable because they don't require an advanced camp type to gather from. You start with a stone cutter's camp by default, so you can gather these. There's also our first cache. Caches are quite useful. Caches are a choice for the player. You can break them open with stone, training gear, or sea marrow to get a one-time haul of resources. The resources contained within are totally random. You may also see perks offered instead of resources that can provide passive bonuses to you. The other option is to send these to the Citadel with tools. You'll get Amber for trading and Queen's Grace, the reputation, the blue points that you need to win. Gathering a lot of tools and sending caches to the Citadel can be one way to get a victory relatively quickly in a game of Against the Storm. There's also a brickyard here. This is a building that we can rebuild in order to have a new building online as part of our settlement, or it can be torn down for a one-time bonus of goods. And then lastly, and most importantly, is our Dangerous Glade event, Fuming Machinery. Events are paired with a threat. There is an effect that will trigger if the event isn't completed in time, which is, in this case, an explosion that will destroy all of the resources that are near the Fuming Machinery. Additionally, this particular event will explode twice. There's a small explosion and then a bigger one. So if you ignore this, it will have several layers of problem. In order to prevent the threat, you have to deal with the requirements of the event. Usually events have two ways to deal with them, and each way will have different requirements. We can tear it down using water and building materials to get some resources, or we can fix it with tools, wildfire essence, parts, pipes, or oil. And it requires quite a few of these. Lots of parts, lots of pipes, and a bunch of containers. Very notably, we don't have the goods required for either solution here, which is relatively typical when it comes to Dangerous Glade events. And that, my friends, is where trading comes in. At the end of the first storm, or at the end-ish of the first storm, actually we need a couple more minutes, your first trader will arrive as long as you've built the trading post. This is one of the big reasons you want to have a trading post online before the end of the first storm. When the trader arrives, we will be able to trade with them. They bring a big random selection of goods, and they're willing to trade that away for our own goods and services here. The start of a new year also heralds a couple of other things. We get another cornerstone to pick. 40 meat and grain for each completed Dangerous or Forbidden Glade event. It's pretty useful. Work Safety Guide gives us a bonus for each villager with education fulfilled. That's a late game service need, which we're not going to be able to do. Or Farsight. Discovering a small glade increases the working speed of scouts investigating Dangerous or Forbidden Glade events. This lets us get glade events tackled faster. Only one of these actually provides resources. I like lost supplies here. This will provide some extra food, in particular meat food, which is quite useful. And newcomers arrive every 10 minutes, so once per year or a little bit more often than that once you're playing on higher difficulties. New people bring with them some resources as well as new workers. At the very beginning, I'm often just choosing whichever one brings more people with us, but you may want to consider the resources that are being provided as well. When you get new people, don't forget to make new houses for them. Otherwise, they will be less happy. So we'll make sure we queue up another shelter here. Now that we have some building materials, I'm also going to try to get our food production online. So we're going to make an herb garden next to the fertile ground that we started with, along with some farm fields. And I see we have room for another one. So let's make 2 herb gardens and have a sort of farming start here. Whereas year 1 for me is all about getting the basic layout of the settlement and my initial camps up, year 2 is usually about completing one or more of the starting quests so that you can get additional blueprints, as well as starting to get some of your advanced needs online. Trying to get blueprints to create complex food, or otherwise tackle the advanced needs of your people. But for us, that starts with completing this Dangerous Glade event, which is going to require help from the trader when they arrive in a moment here. Speed this up a little bit. Where's that trader? 47 more seconds. Okay. Good talk. So as a fertile ground building, these herb gardens will plant crops during drizzle and then harvest it during clearance. Sort of a 2-step process. The building will need to be manned the entire time. So control brings up the production control. Here you control which recipes each building is making. For example, I can tell the herb garden to not make herbs, only make roots. Since roots are a raw food that we can eat directly, whereas herbs have to be made into an advanced food type. So, our trader. Trading. Trading is extremely useful. Trading is where we can procure the goods that we need to tackle difficult, dangerous glade events, or otherwise fulfill weaknesses in our settlement here. So patch any weaknesses your settlement has, whether you need fuel, food, service goods, what have you. The trader can usually hook you up. Your main trading resource is amber, but you've also got a lot of, anything that your settlement has a stockpile of can potentially be traded. Each trader has a different arrangement of goods as well as different things that they're willing to purchase from the player. So we need to deal with this fuming machinery. And for that, we either need a lot of building materials or we need containers. Arluff does sell containers, so we could deal with fixing it. What does fixing this actually do? Extracts moisture from the soil around it and converts it into clearance water. I think I'd rather tear this down for the one-time bonuses. But how are we going to get the water required? That would require making a rain collector building, would it not? I think it would. So, we're going to want to trade Farluff. Let's see, can we get 25 planks? That would cost 725. So our 5 amber will not be enough. I'm willing to part with 1 part to make up the difference here. And that'll give us enough planks to tackle this dangerous glade event, as well as have a little bit left over. But tearing it down requires 24 planks and some water. So we're going to make a rain collector building, which can gather the water required. Unassign a couple woodcutters so that we can work a little faster on that. So yes, you can also use trading to acquire resources to deal with dangerous glade events. I just showed that off. Lastly, you can look for useful perks or blueprints. The trader will have a random selection of passives here on sale for amber, some of which are better than others. For example, bonus pigment production wouldn't be very useful here. Copper ore production I don't think would be that useful. But Ways of the Forest lowers hostility by 50 points. This is a very strong perk, and this I would recommend picking up if you had 22 amber to spare, but we don't. We might be able to purchase 22 amber from the trader by getting rid of all of our parts, but these are pretty hard to replace, and I don't recommend getting rid of more than a handful in the early game. Plus, we can manage the hostility just fine. Lastly, once you have trade routes unlocked, we actually don't have those unlocked in this save file yet, but lastly, you can perform trade routes once you have your trading post done. To do a trade route, you have to make pack of provisions, which are by default created at the makeshift post here. This requires an excess of food, but basically trade routes allow you to get rid of surplus goods along with pack of provisions in order to gain large amounts of amber, which is really, really useful at the trader. So there's our trader allowing us to get the stuff we need for our first dangerous glade event. Our lizards are happy enough. We're still favoring them, by the way. Our lizards are happy enough that they're now blue. That means we're slowly gaining reputation over time to the tune of 0.06 per minute. That's not very much, but the amount of rep you gain is proportional to the number of villagers that are happy, as well as the... Let's see. Yeah, we're going to start using clearance water here. Proportional to the number of villagers that are happy, as well as how happy they are. Alright, I see our trapper's camp ran out of goods here. There's no other nodes, so we're going to unassign these 2 people. And we're going to make a stonecutter's camp. By the way, another very useful general tip for this game, pause early, pause often. Anytime you've got multiple things that you need to handle mentally or You just can't quite figure out what to do. You can pause the game and take some time to take stock and figure out what you should do. So we're making a Stonecutter's camp over here. And we want to face towards the resource nodes. So as a reminder, workers have to go to the camp, then to the resource, then to the camp, then to the warehouse, then to the camp, then to the hearth. So this Stonecutter's camp being very far away from the warehouse and the hearth won't be mined very efficiently. Workers have too long of a path to take here. And we can reduce that path substantially by queuing up a small warehouse, another drop-off point for goods here in this glade. That's going to allow the trips to be much shorter. However, that's going to require some fabric and some bricks, so we need to work at the crude workstation. I also need to assign 2 people to this fuming machinery here. So we have planks, and we're gathering the clearance water right now. So tear that down. These 2 people at the rain collector. Hopefully we'll make enough clearance water to deal with this during this season. Crude workstation. So we're going to tell people to make fabric and bricks here. We already talked about hostilities. We'll just go through all that real quick. So, managing your resources. Once you've got a more complicated resource chain going on, it can definitely be difficult to keep track of all of the different things that you need to do in your settlement. It can also be difficult to keep track of and balance all of your resources. So some quick advice, seek fresh resource nodes in new glades regularly. I like to open around 1 dangerous glade per year, approximately. If you're short on food or fuel, you may feel a greater impetus to get stuff down more quickly. Another quick point of advice, place production limits on buildings. So currently with 1 worker here in the crude workstation, they will make planks and fabric and bricks as long as they have the ingredients to do so. So they'll happily use all of our wood to make planks, all of our plant fiber to make fabric, all of our stone and clay to make bricks. If you need those raw materials for other things in your settlement, then you could quickly run into a problem here by having this worker run amok. And the easiest solve to that is to place limits on your production. See this limit thing here? Type in a number and limit the amount of goods that can be produced. That tells the worker that once you have 10 planks, don't make any more planks. Don't turn any more raw resources into planks. Setting production limits on everything is absolutely essential. My general recommendation is to place a production limit of 5 or 10 on materials that are being produced in small quantities and a limit of around 50 in things that are made in batches of 10. You don't need to place production limits on goods that require no input. For example, you don't need to place production limits on raw food because it doesn't cost you anything to make those in the first place. So by putting production limits here, we prevent all of our raw materials from being turned into building materials unnecessarily. Hold on, actually. What else have I got here? You also want to disable recipes that you don't have a use for. So, for example, if I don't need one of fabric, planks, or bricks, then don't enable it. And that's, for example, why pipes are disabled here, is that I currently have no use for pipes. In the options, you can, under gameplay, tell recipes to either have all ingredients enabled or disabled by default. You can also disable recipes by default, so that you don't make things that you're not using, basically. You may also want to specifically disable certain ingredients in recipes when you don't have a surplus of that ingredient. For example, here we're making... Currently, this worker is told to use either stone or clay to make bricks. We don't actually have any clay, though. And if I got some, maybe I would want it to make something else. So we can disable the clay, tell them to only make bricks out of stone, since we have no clay surplus. One last thing to take note of / be aware of is the building storage. Let's see, these two, are you two working here? Yes, we have enough clearance water now. So it looks like these beavers did not actually deal with the fuming machinery in time. There's going to be a discharge here. Means, one, we should move the warehouse out of the way. This explosion's going to happen. So these copper nodes are going to be destroyed. We may also want to unassign the workers. So when I mean building storage, what I mean is the warehouse tab here. Every time you select a production building, there's the production tab and then the warehouse tab. In the warehouse tab, you can see the ingredients that have been brought to the production building by the workers so far that are going to be then turned into more advanced materials. Buildings that are here, ingredients that are here in the warehouse of a particular building are not part of your larger stockpile. For example, there's 9 wood here. That's not included in the 70 wood that's listed in the warehouse. Sometimes your workers will bring more ingredients to a building than is necessary, especially if you're employing haulers at the warehouse. And this can result in ingredients getting lost or forgotten about, especially if you then unassign a worker from the building. All of the ingredients will still stay in that individual building, again, without being part of the larger warehouse. So this wood isn't available to be burned at the hearth or used for anything else. But you can return it to the main warehouse by pressing the little X there, and that will send it back. So this is mostly something I just wanted to draw awareness to. Awareness to the fact that individual buildings have storages for those ingredients. Those storages can be overstocked, and ingredients that are in individual building storages are not counted as part of your overall warehouse. So you might lose track of them. It's just a little thing to be aware of. Let's get more gardeners here. So we're kind of short on people at the moment. So in 42 seconds, this fuming machinery is going to explode. So I'm going to unassign the beavers there and allow it to explode before I reassign them. All right, we're well past the point where we should have a couple of Glade events completed. In fact, I want to complete this problem solver quest so that we can get our next blueprint up. I also want to pick more orders, which we should have done a while ago. 8 pack of crops and 10 comfort decorations. That's kind of difficult to do. Although, note the reward here. +3 to human resolve is a really good perk. Or simply discover 4 glades to get a whole bunch of stuff. This one sounds nice and easy. And both of these involve jerky. Either have 12 villagers that are simultaneously happy with jerky, or eat jerky 50 times total. Both of these are... meat treats would require us to have 12 villagers who need jerky at the same time. That would mean 12 lizards. So this one's actually much harder to do than meat diet. We'll choose meat diet here. Okay, we should make our carpenter so that we can get more efficient plank production. As we add more production buildings to the settlement, they want to go as close to the main warehouse as possible. That's space that we should be leaving for the most valuable production buildings only. I'm also going to try to get a second hearth up and going during year 3. So year 1 for me is getting the basic buildings up in the settlement. Year 2 is dealing with the first dangerous Glade event. Oops. Shoot. Dealing with the first dangerous Glade event. As well as trying to get up some complex foods. And then year 3 for me is usually about starting to tackle expanding with another hearth, as well as getting people happy enough to start earning reputation over time. Looks like I can't quite place this hearth, so we need to cut a couple more trees here. Not doing all that well on fuel. So we're going to need some more tree choppers. Let's take 2 more beavers, as they're good at tree chopping here. And we're going to pick another cornerstone. More pack of goods. 20 reading clay for each discovered glade. We want to discover some more glades. Let's take exploration contract. Last one requires us to make ale. We don't have ale production online at all. Okay, so these 2 beavers are going to work on tearing down the fuming machinery. It did explode one time, but interestingly, the copper veins were immune. We want to tackle a second Glade event, so I'm going to break open this medium abandoned cache because it counts as a Glade event. We'll get the resources inside, and that'll help us deal with the problem solver quest here. We don't need people working at the rain collector anymore. In fact, we can tear down the rain collector once the fuming machinery is complete. We could also convert this brickyard, if we wanted to, for more efficient brick production. Or we can salvage it for the bricks. Let's actually salvage it, because I want those bricks one time. And we're only going to do a short little how-to here. So that ought to give me the resources that we need for our small hearth here, which we're going to place pretty soon. Hearths have to have their radius not overlapping. You can see the radius of the hearth here is in orange here. So we have to place it just far enough away that there's no overlap. And that'll allow us to start getting houses built sort of in a second location. We definitely want to put enough houses here to house any people that are going to be living here, as well as, just like before, 4 comfort decorations to get that hearth leveled up to level 2 once it's built. So that's quite a bit of stuff to build here. Our villagers will be working on it nice and hard. We should also be seeing our next trader arrive. Yeah, in 2 minutes and 30 seconds, Zorg will arrive. I'd say we should also start to think about cutting into a new glade pretty soonish. And this is sort of the broader pattern you'll want to continue. Getting new buildings up online that can do recipes more efficiently. Now that we have a better way to make planks, we'll want to assign somebody to the carpenter. This is a wood specialization building, so it should be a beaver. Let's take the one from the brickyard and assign them here. You see that spinny wheel? That means they have a 10% chance of doubling their yields. We'll set a slightly higher limit on planks because of the more efficient thing. And then we want to disable planks at the crude workstation, and don't forget to clear the ingredient for planks from the workstation as well. Our first order is ready to complete. We tackled the glade and I guess we salvaged the brickyard both. So we can complete this order. That gives us new people, tools, more planks, as well as our first new blueprint choice. Usually you want to get your first blueprint choice year 2 or even year 1, but we're a little behind. Cookhouse is perfect. This can get us our first advanced food. We already have the rain mill blueprint, which we haven't built yet. But if we get the cookhouse, then we can also make biscuits. So going back to our production chains here, raw food gets turned into flour, gets turned into complex food, and that'll start giving a happiness bonus to people. So to make that happen, we're going to try to make a rain mill and a cookhouse here. It's going to require a lot of building materials. Let's see, this fuming machinery is being dealt with, so we can destroy this now. 2 planks back. We also have Zorg here, who can potentially sell us some more building materials to work with. And I don't mind getting planks, 1 bit. We also want 10 amber from Zorg for the trading post quest, so let's see if we can sell some things to Zorg. A couple parts here. Maybe 10 amber. We can sell off these tools to get 10 amber, and that'll let us complete the order here. Gives us the tools back, more parts, some biscuits to start getting people happy right away, as well as another blueprint here. And I'd say we should take Trapper's Camp. We have that large meat node over here that we currently can't work, as well as the meat specialization cornerstone. So if we take the Trapper's Camp, then we're going to be able to... That actually automatically upgrades this Trapper's Camp, which we never deconstructed. So we can simply move this over here and start working there to get lots of meat. Okay. So with a couple of our orders completed, we are starting to get our settlement really going now. Let's see. Do we want any more building materials? See, what needs to happen for this rain mill? We need fabric and planks, bricks and planks. Let's get some more planks from Zorg if we can, just 5 more. Let's trade the herbs. You can use middle mouse click to automatically balance the value of a trade here. But there's no fabric from... Actually, no, he does have fabric. Okay, let's buy 3 fabric as well. And I'm willing to trade 1 part for that to get up the cookhouse quicker. 5 fabric is how much we get. Keep that moved. So our second hearth is constructed. Each hearth needs a hearth keeper. Lizards are happy at that. Having multiple hearths means we're at higher fuel consumption. In fact, we're critically low on fuel here. So that means we need more woodcutters. But having an additional hearth means we get an additional minus 30 hostility, and it can be leveled up separate from the main hearth. In fact, we can level up both at the same time here. Currently, there are 15 people working at the first hearth out of 8 required for level 1. Second one only has 5 out of 8. So we just take a house that has 3 people and we move it, which does cost 5 wood. And upon moving this house, you'll instantly see that this hearth levels up, and we get another +2 to everybody. So the cookhouse is complete. Here we can use our herbs that are being made at the herb garden along with flour to make biscuits. And we can get the flour from the rain mill. Oops. By turning the grain that we get or roots. So let's see. Let's unassign a couple people. Beavers love working at the rain mill. That's the comfort bonus here for engineering. So we'll have 2 beavers making flour. Limit that to 50. And then lizards like working at the cookhouse. And they can make biscuits using that flour. So now we have raw food being turned into flour. And then that flour combines with more raw food to make biscuits. Biscuits will give a +5 resolve bonus to the humans and the beavers, helping us to earn prestige over time. Currently, only one of our species is dropping into the negatives on resolve here during the storm. We could tackle this in a number of ways. We can lower our hostility level by unassigning woodcutters, but because we're so low on fuel, it would be better for us to simply favor the lizards, since the other species are doing so well with their biscuits. We give the lizards +5, the others -5, and that kind of balances everybody out here. And that helps us last through Storm 3. So as we go into Year 4, my plan would be to take more orders that we can try to complete. We can probably use our herb gardens to make pack of crops for this order. And currently we can't make coats. So I'd probably take pack of provisions, pack of crops, and we can leverage having a lot of food from our farms into completing these 2 orders. We also want to continue to keep all our villagers happy by trying to fulfill more advanced needs. We now have biscuits that are going to be made at the cookhouse as soon as the flour is made, and more cornerstones to pick too. But this looks like the start of a pretty good settlement here. And at the end of Year 3, I'm going to now conclude this primer of Against the Storm. So I hope that this was a useful introduction / tutorial for Against the Storm, giving you some ideas on how to manage and expand a settlement. From here, I'd want to cut into a new dangerous glade pretty soon. We have food that lasts for a pretty good while because of the Leech Broodmother and the 2 farms. So you could go for actually quite a while without cutting into any more glades here, but I would recommend cutting into another dangerous glade or 2 pretty quickly. Trying to complete more orders, and again, in order to get all of the reputation you need to win, you are going to need to get your villagers into the blue level of happiness. So once again, I hope that this was a very useful sort of introduction to Against the Storm, giving you some ideas on how to play it yourself, or giving you an understanding of what you're looking at when you watch it. Coming up on this channel, I do have a playthrough of the Queen's Hand mode, the difficult permadeath mode for this game that we recorded. That'll be coming up in segments as well. So look forward to some high level Against the Storm play here on the YouTube.